Welcome to episode 2. Today we are engaging in a focused, an immersive exploration of the Seva Bollies, the 22 sacred principles from Sant Sevalal Maharaj. And while you might see these categorized simply as guidelines for the Banjara people, the source material, when you look closely, it reveals something far more profound.
It does. We aren't just looking at a list of rules. This is a complete, unified, ethical ecosystem.
It's a fascinating thing, historically.
Oh, absolutely. Revealed in India during the 18th century, we're talking between 1739 and 1806, these teachings were, well, they were prophetic.
How so?
They address environmental collapse, social fragmentation, the crisis of mental health. Centuries before these became global anxieties, it's a blueprint for righteous living that, it integrates the ecological, the social, and the spiritual.
The narrative arc of the principles is just brilliant. It moves from the forest to the village to the family, and then finally into the internal landscape of the human mind.
That's right.
It's a system that truly understands that human well-being cannot exist in isolation. Not from the environment and not from the community.
Let's follow that trajectory then, starting where Sant Sevalal begins with the physical world. The system opens with a foundational belief about our relationship to the environment. The teaching is explicit.
It is. Never leave the forest and do not destroy the forest.
If you destroy the forest, then you are destroying yourself.
This is a radical non-dualism. I mean, in the 1700s, the forest was seen either as a resource to be harvested or
a terrifying wildness to be tamed.
Exactly. Sevalal flips this entirely. He creates an immediate equivalence between human life and the ecosystem.
It suggests that we are not observers of nature. Our very existence is inextricably bound to the health of the biosphere. It frames the forest not as property, but as a life support system. And that reverence, it dictates the lifestyle required to sustain it. The teachings urge us to live a natural life in consonance with nature.
Which isn't just about living outdoors, is it? It's about a kind of temporal alignment.
That's a good way to put it. Syncing with the seasons, the day-night cycles, and explicitly avoiding the lure of artificial comforts that alienate us from the physical world.
So it's effectively a warning against the seduction of a modern lifestyle that, removes humanity from its ecological context.
If you sever that connection, you lose your grounding.
And this stewardship, it extends critically to the most vital resource, water. The directive here is just so stark. Provide water to the thirsty.
Selling water is the biggest sin.
That is a profound prohibition, especially when you view it through a modern lens. It reframes water not as a commodity,
but as a sacred commons.
Right.
In the 18th century, as now, controlling water is a form of ultimate power.
So by declaring the sale of water a sin, Sevalal challenges feudal monopolies and prophetically the modern privatization of our natural resources.
The theological argument is that to deny or monetize water is to deny life itself. It places the right to water above any right to profit.
And this entire segment of environmental ethics, it doesn't just end on preservation. It concludes with a call to active regeneration.
Yes. It's not enough to simply not destroy. The duty is to plant trees, to actively care for the environment. This distinguishes the Seva Bollies from passive conservation. It's proactive.
Whether it's planting trees to mark a birth or protecting sacred groves, the Devre.
Right. The human role is defined as a gardener, not just as a consumer.
So from this grounding in the natural world, the system then shifts its gaze to the social fabric.
Having established how we treat the earth, Sevalal moves to dismantle the rigid hierarchies of how we treat each other.
And this is where the historical context becomes so vital. We are talking about 18th century India, a time of rigid caste structures.
Exactly. And yet, the next principle demands radical human equality. Do not practice discrimination toward anyone in any form.
It just posits that all humans possess equal intrinsic worth. This predates the UN Declaration of Human Rights by nearly 2 centuries.
It's a spiritual assertion that social stratification is, well, it's an illusion.
And from that equality, dignity must spring. The principle requires one to live a life with dignity.
Yes. In the Banjara context, this distinguishes between the Gaur, the proud, authentic self, and the Kaur, who is the blind imitator. It's a call for Swabhiman.
Self-respect.
Self-respect. This is crucial for a marginalized community. Sevalal is arguing for psychological liberation. He's saying that you cannot simply be free, you must feel free.
You must carry yourself with the confidence of that freedom.
And refuse to imitate those who oppress you or dilute your identity.
That dignity, though, it has to be anchored in ethical conduct. Which brings us to the concept of Seva Bollies.
Truth speech. The instruction is to be honest, to never lie, and to never steal.
But Sant Bolli goes deeper than just don't tell lies, doesn't it?
Oh, much deeper. It implies that truth carries a kind of spiritual mass, or vichan siddhi. When one lives in truth, their words gain weight in reality.
And conversely,
Deception fractures the speaker's own psyche. If you lie, you are fragmenting your own reality.
and this respect for the power of words. It extends to how we speak about others. The next principle forbids speaking ill of people.
Yes, it links verbal conduct directly to nonviolence. It identifies gossip and slander as entropic forces. They destroy community trust.
It's a generator of negative karma.
It is. By harming the reputation of another, you aren't just hurting them, you're degrading the cohesion of the very group that keeps you safe. It treats language as a weapon that must be sheathed.
Moving from speech to action, the teachings then address economic integrity. The mandate is clear: business, not begging.
An ethos of entrepreneurship and self-reliance. It rejects the humiliation of dependency, but it also implies a rejection of exploitative labor.
So you have to work with integrity to maintain that dignity we just spoke of.
That's right. It values the sweat of the brow over the charity of others. It reinforces that agency is essential to the human spirit.
And then, perhaps the most striking principle in this social category, particularly for its time, is the view on gender.
This statement is unequivocal.
Women are living goddesses.
In an era deeply entrenched in patriarchal norms, this is revolutionary. It isn't just a call for respect in some chivalrous sense. It's a theological assertion.
So by equating women with the divine, Sevalal demands equality in spiritual, social, and economic spheres.
It suggests that mistreating a woman isn't just a social crime, it's a sacrilege. It elevates gender equality to a spiritual imperative.
Fundamentally altering the power dynamics within the community. So having established individual rights and social equality, the system then shifts its focus to the collective.
The nurturing of relationships within the family and the wider community. It begins with the most basic human need: food. The principle is to provide food to the hungry.
This reflects that pan-Indian ethos of Atithi Deva Bhava, the guest is God.
Right. But here, food security is framed as a spiritual duty. It ensures that compassion is active, not theoretical. If your neighbor is hungry, your own spirituality is incomplete.
This compassion is then structured across generations and species. The teaching pairs respecting elders with loving the young.
And respecting animals. It suggests a healthy society requires an intergenerational balance. You need the wisdom of the old to protect the vitality of the young.
And by including animals in this circle of care, it acknowledges that our community includes sentient beings who cannot speak for themselves. It widens the scope of empathy.
Absolutely. And to sustain this social stability, the sanctity of the immediate family is paramount.
The principles explicitly forbid involvement in illicit relationships.
Which is often read as simple moral policing, but in the context of community survival, it is about trust.
It frames fidelity not just as sexual morality, but as a requirement for family stability and for the emotional security of children.
If the family unit is fractured by deceit, the community weakens from the inside out.
And that responsibility expands outward from there. The instruction is to respect parents, care for the family, and crucially,
never break the brotherhood. Here, the community is viewed as an extended family. The brotherhood is the social safety net.
to break it through betrayal or abandonment is to sever your own roots. In a nomadic or tight-knit culture, isolation is the ultimate poverty. You just cannot survive without the collective.
Now, the trajectory of the Seva Bollies turns inward. We've talked about the forest, society, the family. Now we move to the internal landscape of the individual.
The mind and the spirit.
Precisely. And the first step in this internal work is the conquest of fear. The teaching is, do not worry, be fearless.
Mirbe.
Yes, Nirbe. It acts as both spiritual courage and a preventative measure against anxiety.
It does. It suggests that fear is the primary obstacle to clarity and right action. If you operate from fear, you can't live with dignity. You become reactive, not proactive.
And to achieve that clarity, you have to cultivate the intellect. The mandate is to meditate, study, and gain knowledge.
This is incredibly significant. It pairs dhyana, meditation, with adhyana, education. For a marginalized community in the 18th century to place such a high value on literacy and study, that was a radical act of empowerment. It asserts that the path to God and the path to social upliftment both run through the mind.
And that education is not meant to foster blind obedience. The protocol for thinking is laid out very clearly.
First know, then analyze, then accept.
It's a critical thinking framework. It directly opposes superstition and blind faith. Seval is asking the listener to engage their reason to verify truth through analysis before accepting it.
He doesn't want followers, he wants thinkers.
Exactly.
Once the mind is clear, the heart must be purified. The teachings warn us to reject material greed and sensual excess.
It's a distinction between need and greed. It calls for contentment, or santosha. The goal is to love humanity rather than loving money, to find wealth in relationships and peace, not in accumulation.
It acts as a check against the consumerism that destroys that natural life we mentioned at the start.
Right. And this internal discipline then manifests in specific physical practices. The Seva Bollies move into a segment on purity and compassion, starting with a strict prohibition.
On intoxicants. Do not consume toxic substances.
The rejection of alcohol is absolute, and the rationale is pragmatic as well as spiritual. Intoxication clouds the consciousness you need for meditation.
But it also fuels the violence and poverty that destroy families. You can't protect the brotherhood if you are chemically compromised.
That's right. And finally, that purity of conduct extends to our relationship with the divine and the animal world. The principle commands us to love and protect animals.
Specifically banning animal sacrifice.
This represents a massive theological shift for the time. It argues that the goddess is the mother of all life. Therefore, she desires compassion, represented by offerings of sweets or lapsi.
Not the blood of her own creation.
Correct. It connects the concept of ahimsa, nonviolence, directly to worship. It redefines the nature of the divine. If God is love, then worship cannot be violent.
We arrive now at the final layer of this ethical architecture, the principles for cultural survival and identity.
The penultimate principle is the protection of language and culture. We must protect Gorboli.
And language here is presented as much more than just a tool for communication.
It's the carrier of the worldview. If the language is lost, the unique connection to the ancestors, the specific wisdom of the culture, is lost.
So protecting the culture is a spiritual duty.
Yes, because the culture is the vessel that holds these values. It's an act of resistance against homogenization.
And this leads to the capstone, the final principle that binds all the others together.
Unity is strength.
Bonte Takate, Justed Jat.
Divided we fall, united we win.
It's the ultimate survival strategy.
It is. After outlining how to live with nature, how to treat one another, how to govern one's own mind, the final message is that none of this can be sustained in isolation. Overcoming internal divisions, be they of clan, region, or class, is the prerequisite for the community's endurance.
When you view these 22 principles in their totality, they're not merely ancient history.
No, they form a living moral architecture.
It's a synthesis, isn't it? It integrates environmental stewardship, social justice, mental resilience, and community solidarity into a single cohesive worldview.
And while these principles are rooted in the specific experience of the Banjara community, they offer a blueprint for universal human flourishing. In a modern world grappling with ecological collapse and social isolation, this wisdom is not just relevant.
It's urgent.
It's urgent.
As Sant Sevalal said, liberation is in truth.
Jai Havani. Jai Sevalal Maharaj.